for this panel. And we had a quite interesting panel discussion about super apps, but now we're going to delve more into ultra platform. The panelists briefly mentioned ultra app, so we're going to delve more into ultra platform, which is something that you coined, if I'm not mistaken, and you consider as an upgrade from the super app model. Yeah. So briefly, can you briefly talk about how this idea of an ultra platform came about?
Sure. So I think the connotation of ultra is just a way to segregate from super, right? So it's whatever is beyond super is ultra. The reason we try to make this segregation is, as people spoke on the previous panel, there has been a massive super app hype or bubble that has been building over the past decade in this part of the world. So it started off with Uber, then expanded to Gojek, Grab, and what have you in Southeast Asia, and so on and so forth. None of those platforms proved successful business models. So if you look at Gojek, although somebody mentioned it's been successful in Southeast Asia, Gojek is a company that posted a $1.5 billion loss as of last year, right? And they've been around for a very long time. Uber has made $25 million in profit after a $100 billion IPO. That's very close to what a branch of McDonald's does in profit. So it's the unit economics never added up on most of the wannabe super platforms concepts. And the reason why people kept delving more and more into it is mainly, I feel, the capability to fundraise further and further. Investors had the appetite to fund unforeseeable profit. And people who started off with a ride-hailing base or with some service base started saying, okay, maybe if we add a bunch of icons to our app, we can call ourselves super. So this is where we felt that we need to segregate or step a bit further from the connotation of what super platform is.
We've all heard of customer fatigue that arises from the oversaturation of platforms. So how would the ultra platform address that?
So ideally what super platforms have been trying to do is say, listen, you've downloaded our app to buy food or to get a taxi. Why don't we throw in a bunch of icons and say, we're going to sell you insurance, we're going to sell you, I don't know, vaccines, we're going to sell you laundry now, I don't know. So as a user, the only thing that's happening here is that my data is getting abused by this platform. And unlike what most of the rhetoric about super platforms is that we know customer behavior, but you actually don't, because if you have a successful ride-hailing platform, that doesn't mean you know anything about food clients. The people who ride taxis and the people who order food at home are very different user personas. That doesn't really mean that by necessity you know anything about laundry or healthcare services and so on and so forth. The only thing it tells is that you're trying to abuse economics out of your user data to spin off or flash a better balance sheet at the end of the year, which has not been successful as well. And that's where we felt that there's a massive case of user fatigue. Today you feel as a user to conduct any sort of task or any sort of daily need, you have hundreds of platforms on your phone, and you have more and more of those wannabe super platforms abusing you with advertisement, abusing your data with trying to upsell you, trying to cross-sell you, and so on and so forth. And that's where that emerges.
That brings me to my next question. What about businesses and vendors? How are they able to connect with customers?
So I think businesses have had the worst deal out of the whole super app evolution, right? So if you consider an Uber driver a small business or an MSME, Uber drivers are on protest somewhere or another around the world every other week, right? Which says that they did not have a very good deal out of the ride-hailing platforms. Because when the thing evolved and people started looking at super platforms as a very unprofitable business, there was a massive push by investors towards profitability. And as a platform, there are only two ways you can make money, either from your buyer or from your supplier. And those are the people that got abused. So if you're in Dubai, for example, less than 10% of the population can afford an Uber ride, right? Nobody else is included. And most of the Uber drivers don't really have a great deal or are not really getting immensely rich out of driving taxis. And so on for the restaurants on the food apps, and so on for all of the other businesses on those platforms.
We've seen this year a massive amount of funding from startups. And if I'm not mistaken, in July, you plan to raise $500 million, which is massive. How did you get that investor confidence during a very difficult economic time?
So I feel the time is actually very difficult for unprofitable businesses. The time is very difficult because a lot of businesses have been exposed, and that's what made the difficulty happen. And I don't think we've seen actually, to your point, I don't think we've seen a lot of funding this year. I think we're in a good case of funding crunch, if you want, heading into a funding depression over the past 2 years, over the next 2 years. For us, the case was simple, is that most of the super apps that exist today don't make money and will never make money and will never be profitable. And as you see it today, most of those companies are losing on their workforce, are firing people rapidly, are trying to scale down their businesses as much as possible just to sustain, which in my opinion tells us that over the next 24 months, most of the platforms that we see today will not exist anymore. And this is where it was, we felt that it was a very good opportunity for us to go out and about and put together a bunch of investors that actually understand the unit economics of things and build it correctly on top of the demise, if you want, of the rest of those platforms.
Do you think that the Ultra platform would somehow impact the region's tech ecosystem?
The tech ecosystem.
As in yeah.
Like I said, the Ultra platform, at least what we're building, is probably going to absorb a lot of what you see today in those businesses. Absorb them in terms of market share, absorb them in terms of user bases, absorb them in terms of actual businesses that exist. So as Astra, we've done about 5 acquisitions since the beginning of the year, and that's us absorbing businesses with their users and their use cases. And I think this is going to continue to set precedent over the next 24 months at least.
So the Ultra platform hasn't launched yet. Can you give us sort of an insight on when it's going to be available?
Sure. So I think by January we'll probably be up and running. Not to spoil any surprises, but I think most of the people in the room today have our platforms in their phones already. And this is part of our biggest jest, is that we're not trying to reinvent anything. We're just trying to make correct the unit economics, correct the user journey, make one tech base that can incubate all the use cases that you can that our users would need.
So what's next? Are you planning to acquire more existing businesses?
Yes. So I think we are already in the process of a few. You will be soon announcing our last batch of acquisitions into Astra. That will merge into our platforms, and the challenge for us over the next while is to just make those platforms, those user bases, those personas coherent, and get them to work together.